Democrats are slamming a decision by a federal judge in Texas, a decision to suspend the FDA's longtime approval of the abortion pill mifepristone. It's one of two approved pills used to carry out what is more than half of the country's legal abortions. Shortly after the Texas ruling, just to make things really complicated, a Washington state judge blocked changes to mifepristone's availability on behalf of 17 states and the District of Columbia that are suing to expand access. The Biden administration has condemned the Texas ruling, not the Washington one. Here's Vice President Kamala Harris with reaction.
There is no question that the president and I are going to stand with the women of America and do everything we can to ensure that women have the ability to make decisions about their health care, their reproductive health care, in a manner that is what they need, and they decide that, not their government.
Joining us now is CBS News political director Finn Gomez with more on this conversation. Finn, there are political repercussions here. Right. I think it was the cover of New York Magazine that had a headline recently along the lines of abortion is a winning issue for Democrats, certainly difficult for Republicans at the ballot box. We heard Lindsey Graham on Fox News reacting to the Texas ruling. Let's listen to that and then talk about it.
I'm very pro-life, and I think being pro-life is a winning message. I oppose late-term abortions. I have a bill to set a national minimum standard of 15 weeks. 50 of the 53 European nations ban abortion at 15 weeks. I have an exception for rape, incest, and life of the mother. In Wisconsin, you had an 1840 statute that banned abortion pretty much across the board, and the Republican Party did not put an alternative on the table. If you're pro-life, you need to explain what that means.
That is Senator Lindsey Graham. That cover in New York Magazine, by the way, abortion wins elections. That was the argument. Are other Republicans in Washington defending this decision from a judge in Texas?
Yeah, Tony, you have seen some reaction, especially from the 2024 front, including potential presidential Republican contender, former Vice President Mike Pence, who celebrated that initial Texas ruling and said that, quote, life won again. But for overall, it's been somewhat of a muted response. And with, on the Democratic side, of course, with the White House and the DOJ saying that they will fight the Texas ruling, that initial one over the abortion pill, the president saying over the weekend that the Texas judge, then that ruling was essentially taking away basic freedoms from women and putting their health at risk. But it has, if you think about it, Tony, and if you look back to the last cycle, that midterm cycle, where we saw the reversal of Roe v. Wade, how it galvanized Democratic voters, base voters, women voters to really come out in the polls and it took over that initial momentum from Republicans that were basing a lot of their platform during the midterm cycle on inflation and other issues. So there is some within the Republican Party who look at this. There's also like a Wall Street Journal article that basically question this, that how this could there could be this backlash. There could be this political momentum the other way that we saw in last year's midterm cycle with that Roe v. Wade ruling here. There was a poll that came out, a Reuters poll that came out just last month on this, Tony, that said that just 27% of those surveyed support a overturning of access to this abortion drug, while like 70%, 7 to 10 Americans in that poll oppose such a ruling, Tony.
So it's complicated for Republicans, also not uncomplicated for Democrats. Some on the left of the president, that is, are telling the president to ignore the ruling by this Texas judge. I'm thinking of Ron Wyden, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as well. Right. A Wall Street Journal had an editorial today about how these two are endorsing law-breaking. So what in particular is AOC telling the president to do?
To not listen to it, essentially. And I think but I think what you're seeing is just like the tipping point of what could be a very enduring momentum because of this ruling, which again, we can see something that perhaps mirrors what we saw in last year's midterm cycle, where it spurs Democratic base voters and women voters and young voters to really, to be more active, to be mobilized potentially, and that could cause. I know it's early in the cycle, Tony, but it could cause this political organizing that was so impactful during the midterms.
Okay, shifting gears here into something that is both somehow less serious but also more serious. I'm talking about 2024 and the White House Easter egg roll, which returned. The theme was Egg-ucation, and at this event, it was a golden opportunity for reporters to ask the president whether a possible 2024 campaign launch was coming. Here's the exchange.
Help a brother out. Make some news for me.
I plan on running now, but we're not prepared to announce it yet.
On a morning show that shall not be named with a reporter that I think you all know, Mr. Al Roker. All right, so when are we going to see the former president officially launch his re-election campaign, if it's coming, as apparently it is?
He did say he plans on running, but he's just not prepared to announce it yet. A very big tell there, obviously, Tony. But I mean, Ed O'Keefe and I had some reporting last week that, per sources close to the White House and close to the president's political operation, there's been a shift. There was initially this fluid timeline of April, but now, in part because of the Republican infighting, and in part because there's really no rush for the president to jump into the fray at this point, with not only that said infighting, but the fact of the matter is that not the majority of the potential contenders on the Republican side haven't even entered the race either. Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, who has been in most polls #2 to the early frontrunner, former President Donald Trump, has not declared himself. So for these Democrats that we spoke to, who are close to the president's political operation, say why jump in now? But clearly, I mean, the question is not if he's going to jump in, it's just a matter of when. And of course, that shift from April could be early in the summer, June, possibly even July. But the fact of the matter is that it does indicate, I think these comments today and the reporting that we had earlier does indicate that it's, that the president will be announcing his reelect, and it'll be potentially later in the next couple months, Tony.
Yeah, so the quote, just so people are fully informed here, this will be talk of the cocktail hour, I'm sure, today. At this egg roll, he said he plans, this is the president speaking, he plans to participate in, quote, at least 3 or 4 more Easter egg rolls, maybe 5. I don't know where he gets 5 exactly. Your math is better than mine. Okay, 5. Yeah, that would be the exact number. Okay, yeah. All right, pretty strong hint. Finn Gomez.
Big hint.
Thank you for working through the elementary school math and the egg roll stuff with me. Appreciate it.
Anytime, Tony.